Hi Sondangale. So today we have a special guest and he's actually an ex-USCIS officer who's the person who actually sat behind the counter and he was adjudicating EB-1A, EB-2 and EB-3 applications. So today we'll ask some questions about extraordinary ability visas and insights into that. He's practicing law for almost 17 years and out of that 17, 7 years as actually as an USCIS officer. So welcome UNJ Law. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Sure, it's great to be with you.
Would you like to add anything further on that introduction?
No, the one thing I'll say is just having adjudicated cases. It's interesting being on both sides. I loved being the person who could make the decision, and now the challenge is persuading others to approve the case. But I just have a unique insight into both sides of the table.
Thank you so much. So if you need any immigration help with manifest law, that you can scan the QR code which will be appearing in the screen right now, and the details will also be available in the video description. Let's get into it.
Sounds good.
Okay, even most Indian professionals, they think that this extraordinary ability visas, as soon as they hear the word extraordinary ability, they think it is some out of reach or reserved for a very special person. So how wrong they are for someone who's actually looking up for this EB-1A?
Well, there's a variety of things that people hear about it, and especially if you Google it, you come up with words like sustained a claim. It's these very larger than life phrases. And so I think that can be a little daunting to some people, but if they look at the criteria that they need to meet, and we'll talk more about that, you have to meet at least 3 of 10 criteria. Those tend to change people's viewpoint. They recognize, oh, wait a minute, I've done the reviewing the work of others. I've done some of these other things. And so, in essence, it's helpful for people to understand that the definition is basically those who have risen to the top of the field. And so they don't need to be famous, but there is this acclaim or recognition aspect of the case. But basically, these are multifaceted cases, and oftentimes we find that people are more qualified than they think for the petition.
Okay, that makes sense. My second question is like you probably would have seen people who actually waiting for EB2 category for almost 15 years. Sometime realize that wait a minute, like I am eligible for EB1A to try. So how common is this? How common like, you have seen cases like this?
It does happen quite a bit. Oftentimes, a colleague of theirs might be applying for and receive the EB1, and they start to say, wait a second, I've done similar things as that person. Maybe I can qualify for this as well. And so I've had a few clients that have gone through this. We even have a colleague of ours who was one of the top drummers in Peru, and he didn't realize he could have applied for the EB1A case and ended up taking other legal avenues to come to the U.S. So, it does happen quite a bit, and at that time, really, what I've referred to oftentimes is that people do portfolio digging, and in that case, they have not known about the classification, and so they really need to dig into their past to find, okay, what are the things I've already done to qualify for this?
Okay. So my next question is like what type of applicants you think are more qualified but they generally don't categorize themselves to get the CB1A?
Yes, good question. I think this goes back to what I mentioned about a claim and the recognition where some people feel like, well, I've got an important role in my organization, and I have risen to the top of my field, but I really don't have things like, publications, scholarly articles and citations, and, I'm not featured in news articles or, other published material. And so that can be something that might hold them back. And so this could be people, in the behind the scenes production types roles. If you look at the filmmaking industry, well, there's a lot of content creators that play these enormously impactful roles, but they aren't the lead individuals getting the recognition usually. And so, that can be a case type that fits well with this. But really, I think it comes in a variety of forms. production managers. People at very high levels of IT companies and in a variety of ways. If they feel like most of their accolades are internal, they might feel like, okay, well, this is not the case type for me. But something like leading or critical role, that's one of the criteria that they can meet for a distinguished organization. So I think those are a few. Sometimes there are less common types of fields. For example, I approved a case for an architect when I worked for the government. It's not a case type you see very often.
Mm.
And so some of these, one of the things I mentioned about, others hearing from a colleague that was approved for the case. Well, if in certain fields people aren't applying for that very often, well, they're not going to hear it from a colleague. And so there really needs to just be a lot more information given about the classification. And I think that is happening a lot more now. But still, there are a lot of people that don't think they're qualified.
Okay, so my next question is like, apart from the tech industry and the medicine, what other fields you see that like people actually could get, but they are generally not willing to come forward?
Yeah, so one of the cases that I referenced when I worked for the government was for a fashion designer. And I think in many cases there are aspects of recognition in that, but at the same time, people might feel like, well, if I haven't, if I've been on runways, or, judging runways and things like that, maybe they can't qualify. But I would also say sometimes the music industry gets overlooked as well.
Mhm.
I think one thing that I would say that's interesting about the case type is that there are certain fields that seem better aligned with the criteria, but that doesn't mean the others are excluded. On the other hand, there are some fields that are very difficult to rise to the top, like as an actor or a musician in a band. Those can be very difficult to demonstrate that you've risen to the top of the field. And so, in general, I think one way I would answer this is also by saying there are these two facets of cases or aspects of the case. One showing that you've risen to the top of the field, the other is the recognition or acclaim. And just some professions are better aligned with some of that than others. So what I would suggest is really people should not limit themselves. In other words, there's nowhere that says only these fields are applicable. There are general categories they need to fit in, but usually that encompasses quite a range of professionals. So, but again, if you look at the sports world, that can be a challenging one to stand out in as well. So, in essence, what we're trying to let people know is, it's just kind of like you're being graded on the curve, or you're being compared to your colleagues or others in the field. That's really what it comes down to. But that doesn't mean you have to be the only one who's at that level. You don't need to be the Lionel Messis of the world to meet this classification.
That makes sense. You don't have to be Lionel Messi. Okay, so
that's good.
That
Good news.
lets us to this next question. Some people, and I think most, think that you at least need like a Nobel Peace Prize or like Grammy Award, but I don't think that is the actual criteria. If you have, that's good, but that I don't think that's actual criteria. So, can you name any everyday achievement that people can associate with also qualifies for this EB-1A apart from Nobel Prize or Grammy or like with the top of the line awards?
Sure. One of the ones that does come to mind right away is reviewing the work of others, or even something similar where you've been invited to give a presentation at a conference, or someone has reached out to you and it's clear that they reached out to you because of your expertise and they're relying on you educating others and demonstrating that you're knowledgeable and highly skilled in this area. What's interesting about this case type is when I adjudicated these cases, and for many officers, I think this is the same when when you get to that category, which is known as the judging criterion or reviewing the work of others, oftentimes that's viewed as one of the lower tiered criteria. And so what I would encourage people to do is recognize that, even if after they've filed, if they get a request for evidence on that, you really need to lean into that and educate the officer on, no, this is why the judging criterion is so impactful, because this expertise that I have is being used to judge the work of others. And so by raising that, hopefully in the mind of the officer, that can put them in a better place. But so that meets one of the criteria. And then other aspects of the case, you need to meet at least 3 out of the 10. But you also need to demonstrate the ways in which you are recognized as an expert in your field. So one thing I also suggest along with that is anytime people are doing these types of things, judging the work of others, or work on an editorial board, take those steps, continue to network and see what else comes from that. If they can, if they're invited to present later on, that can come out of those opportunities. So that's one that I would say. A lot of the other ones I think get a lot more discussion points on the internet, but that's probably what I would start with.
So the discussion point on the internet is different than the actual points which the officers actually look into it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
So my next question is when you come across a profile, what is one thing which you think, oh, this person should be applying for an O1 visa? Do you have any 1 or 2 points which you recommend people?
Usually when I find out that they are being compensated at a very high level for high salary, or that they're in a significant leadership position or performing a very key role for their organization, that's usually where it starts for me, because many times especially if these individuals have heard, well, I have to be famous or have a lot of recognition in my field. Well, these are 2 components where they generally don't. People don't go around talking about their salary and the roles that they perform for a company. Many times they feel very pleased with the work they have performed, but they aren't necessarily viewing this, or maybe they don't recognize just how economically impactful it is for the company as well. So some of those details can come out the more you prepare the case.
Thank you. I know a lot of Indians who are actually stuck in EB2 or EB3 backlog. So, and suddenly they realize that they can also pursue EB-1A. Can they do so without hindering their existing EB2 or EB3? How does that work?
Definitely. You can apply for as many of these petitions as you would like. And the only thing to really keep in mind is, for example, if you are looking into doing an EB2 NIW and an I-140 EB1 case at the same time in premium processing, well, there might be a little bit of overlap. That makes it just a little bit tricky for the adjudication, but they generally still will be able to separate that into 2 different officers adjudicating that. Back when I was adjudicating cases with the Administrative Appeals Office, if someone had filed a case, for example, while they were appealing one of the other ones, what would usually happen is the newest one would be on hold while the appeal is taking place. So that causes a few issues. But usually with something like this, if people have applied for an EB2 NIW or a regular EB2 case, it's happened years ago and perhaps it's still pending. And so really there aren't any issues. They can go forward and apply for an EB-1A. And oftentimes the EB2 NIW can be a stepping stone toward the EB-1A, as well as an O1 can be a very good stepping stone toward the EB-1A as well.
Okay. So to a person who is actually looking into this video and say, wait a minute, I could qualify for EB-1A. So what is the first step you think they can take this week?
Usually what I tell people is if they think from looking at the regulations that they could meet at least two criteria. And some of the other ones they have some questions about or some possibilities. That's when I say that now is a good time to have a consultation with an attorney, because they can, throughout that discussion, you can explore a few other aspects of the person's career. For example, someone might think, well, I've performed a leading or critical role, but it was for a company that I worked for maybe 3 years ago. And they might think, well, that might not qualify. Well, actually, that can qualify. There's this part of sustained acclaim that shows, where you have to show this is a continuous recognition over a period of time. And so that type of evidence can help your case. So I usually let people know, a consultation can give a lot of clarity. Even if people aren't ultimately ready to file at that time, they at least get some more awareness about the steps that they can be taking to prepare for the time that they would apply for the classification.
Okay. Thank you. And is there anything else you think I could have asked you on this subject, or you have any other points to add here?
I think one other thing I would just mention is that there are a lot of things that get posted on Reddit about things that have worked for others, and you can get in the comparison game quite heavily. And so, for example, people might be posting, well, to have this approved, you really need to apply for the original contributions criterion. Well, what I would just remind people is these are unique, every case has its own unique components to them. So I would say there's value in comparing and learning from others' experiences. But you also want to recognize that you are your own person. You are have your own career, your own unique components to it. And so really lean into the expertise that you have. And there might be something unique about your case type that can be presented that might not have been helpful for another person to include, and vice versa. The things that you're hearing might not be the best things for you to submit in your case as well. So that's another reason why a consultation can be very helpful.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ivan. That's all I have, and thank you for your time.
Sure. Yeah, it's great being with you today, and let us know if we can help in any way.